Hello, everyone, and welcome to a live recording of IDEO's Creative Confidence Podcast, where we talk with creative leaders about innovation, leadership, and growth. I'm your host, Mina Seetharaman, head of new ventures here at IDEO and also of the team here at IDEO U. And as always, it is a delight to be here with all of you. So, for those of you who are kind of regulars to the podcast, know that we love to hear where you are joining us from and for you to drop your names into the chat. So, if you haven't done it already, definitely do that. Definitely drop where you're coming to us from and also like your name. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, folks from Minneapolis, that's amazing. Somebody from Qatar, someone from Karachi. Oh my goodness, someone from Toronto. This is like my favorite part of the podcast, to be honest, because it's so amazing how many of you join us from all over the world. Someone from Redwood Shores, from Paraguay, um, New Mexico. I love this. So as always, I shouldn't say as always, as usual, I'm coming to you from just north of New York City. And our guest today is Ben Swire, who's the co-founder of Make Believe Works and the author of a new book called Safe Danger. I'll tell you more about him and the book in a minute, but Ben is calling in actually from IDEO's San Francisco studio. Hey, Ben.
Hello.
But normally you're on the East Coast where I am, I think, right?
Yes, normally I'm in Brooklyn.
So this will be a lot of fun. Oh my gosh, there are people from Poland, someone from White Plains. I live just down the road from White Plains, so this week I could meet with that person. If you've been a part of our community for a while, we thank you. We always appreciate it. And you might also notice that our Creative Confidence logo got a little bit of a refresh, so definitely look for that in your podcast feed. And to just give you the shape of today's episode, we will start with a short warm up. Then we'll explore a few big ideas about team culture, trust, and creativity. And then, of course, we'll be taking your questions in the Q&A toward the end. So definitely make sure to be sharing those in the chat throughout the episode. So today we're going to be talking about team building. And I almost wish I could see everybody's face because I know everybody hears team building. I see your face, but everybody gets a little flinchy when they hear the term. Every manager eventually has to face that dreaded moment of being asked to plan something meaningful for their team without it feeling awkward or forced or like a waste of time in the worst case scenarios. And when most people hear those two words, they think about trust falls or trivia nights, something that feels light, maybe optional, even a little bit cringe. But Ben, you tell us that good team building does not look like this. And more importantly, there is no reason something with purpose cannot also be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
So, our conversation today will be about how leaders can intentionally build the conditions for trust, creativity, and real connection at work. And Ben will introduce us to the idea of safe danger, creating spaces where people can take risks, where they can practice vulnerability and learn together without fear of retribution, which frankly sounds amazing. So, before we dive into all of that, I do want to share a little bit about Ben's background. He is the co founder of Make Believe Works, and there they design and lead workshops that help teams build trust, connection, and creative confidence. Of course, we're fans. He has worked with Fortune 500 companies and first year startups, a lot of brands you will recognize: Google, American Express, Spotify, P&G, Netflix, many more. And he is the author of this book, Safe Danger. I'm going to hold it up so people can see the cover. It is based on years of observing what actually helps teams work better together. And I have to say, not to just tout the book, but I really enjoyed it because I love that you explain a concept and that there are actionable activities and things that people can be doing. So if that's the kind of combination you like, I can't recommend it enough. And I would be remiss, frankly, if I did not mention that Ben is also a former design lead here at IDEO. So not only are we excited to welcome you back into the San Francisco studio, but also onto the podcast. We love having IDEO alum on the podcast. And his work really sits at the intersection of creativity, culture, and leadership, not in theory, but in practice, having done that work inside real teams with real constraints. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm
So let's
IDEO, yeah.
start. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
I
go
was just
ahead.
gonna say IDEO changed my life when I
Oh
first
my
joined,
goodness.
and it set me on the path that I'm on now, so it is such just a great joy to be able to come back and share what it taught me and what I've learned since then too.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like this is true for so many. It's true for me too. And It's always really nice when we hear that because I think we love the idea that we can have some impact in the world. And to do it through our alumni network is kind of amazing. So I want to start with a short warm up that demonstrates what Ben talks about when he's speaking about safe danger. It's one of the activities from Make Believe Works. And so, if you don't have one handy, if you could grab a pen and a sheet of paper, this is an activity you can do along with us. And then I will hand it over to you to lead us through this.
Terrific. Yeah, this is an activity that I've done with small groups as a sort of warm up icebreaker. I've done it at conferences with 300 people. So it's a really nice. It's an adaptable system. So um, we all have had people in our lives at some point that sort of helped us find the path to being the person that we hope to be. Someone in your life whose inspiration back then was crucial to how you show up in the world now. So, maybe it was the aunt who told you that your voice mattered, or the teacher who pushed your curiosity, or the camp counselor who celebrated your lanyard, whatever it may have been. Um, Take a moment and think of that person for you, without whom you just wouldn't be you. Who was that person? And then what we do is I'm going to ask you to tell that story in two ways, the story of that person's impact on you, with words and with pictures. So, with the picture, I'd like you to just draw a single iconic image or imagery that sort of brings that story to life for you. And then for the words, just think of like a description or a quote or something that sums up what that person added to your life. So,
Okay.
um, it can be I usually don't give people enough time to do this, and that's on purpose because I don't want them to think that it has to be perfect. It's just sketch it out. It's really about the sentiment and the idea and honoring this person, that meant so much.
Um, I I feel like this is a moment of vulnerability for me because I'm basically going to be showing everybody that I work at an iconic design firm and cannot draw. But here we go. Here it is.
Okay.
All right. So I'm
And
just
so
right down. Great.
after at when I do this in a workshop, after everybody has had a few minutes to draw their thing and write it, what I do is we just ask people to share the stories behind their drawings, and their words. And it's important that they are stories, not just facts. This is about the why, about the person, why this matters so much to you, how they impacted you. So I can go first, Mina, if you want to,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
keep working on yours.
That's
Um,
good.
so let's see if I can put this up there. This is mine. It's a little Snoopy and it says make more. And that's because for me, the person was my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Goldman. And Mrs. Goldman loved art. And every Friday we had a special art project. And one week the activity was to take these little cardboard silhouettes of Snoopy, the cartoon dog, and trace it onto construction paper and then dress him up and color him however we'd like. So there were football Snoopies, there were ballet Snoopies, there were pizza making Snoopies. You can imagine, it was fourth grade. I made a wizard Snoopy with a pointy hat and a cape and stars. I mean, I really went to town on the stars. I remember that specifically. And I was so proud of it. And as I was leaving the classroom that day, I showed it off to her and I just said, this was so much fun. I wish I could make more. And she sort of stopped me and just said, hold on. And she ran into the room and came back with one of these templates that she had handed out before. And she gave it to me and she just said, make more. And
Aw.
it may seem silly, but it had never occurred to me that I could just make more on my own. This was part of an activity. The activity was over. You go home. So instead, I went home and I made a Jedi Snoopy and an artist Snoopy and a Snoopy's everywhere. Um, I think I made about 30. And it just started me on a path of taking ownership over my own creativity, of not just stopping when the assignment was over, but really looking for ways to take things further, to expand it, to add my own twist on things. And that's all because she gave me that push to make more.
That's
So
amazing.
that was for Mrs.
That
Goldman.
people are thanking you for giving a shout out to your teacher. And
Oh.
one person gave a shout out to their fifth grade teacher who told them they were a beautiful writer. Um, some of the comments, like, I'm actually gonna stop reading them because they're making me a little emotional, and instead, I'm gonna share with you my excellent drawing, that doesn't look at all like this person except that they're female.
Oh,
Um, and so this is a drawing of, a woman I used to work for. Her name's Kathleen. I have no idea if she watches the podcast or not because 'cause she'll be totally embarrassed. But these things here, she was always thinking about her people. Over here, I felt like she's one of those rare people who can hold the tension between a big strategic idea and the execution aspects of those ideas. And the phrase that I wrote down was believe in your own potential. Because I was the kind of person who never actually saw my own potential. And she would come to me and say, "You're ready for a director role." She was now working, she'd been my boss in one place, went and worked somewhere else, and she said, "If you're not getting that opportunity, I would like to give you that opportunity because you deserve that opportunity." And so she hired me into this director role and coached me in the areas where I was weaker. And then eventually, 3 years later, she said, "I've made the recommendation that you should be promoted up to my level because I think of you as a peer and not as somebody who reports to me." And I was shocked because I thought, like, what a generous leader, but also I never really saw myself in that position. And so that idea of seeing yourself the way others see you, to believe in your own potential, was such a gift to me, and so I try and instill that in others, but also remind myself sometimes to, like, get out of my imposter syndrome and believe in, like, what I maybe bring to the table a little bit. So that's Kathleen. I really value her.
that's beautiful. It's lovely, and I think one of the fun things about this activity is realizing how many different people at different stages we may have had that have had this impact on us. It's the best thing is watching people sort of struggle and try to pick one because it is a nice the activity itself is a really nice reminder of how many people we carry around with us, who we are the result of their kindness or their insight or their leadership. And it's a nice way to honor them.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about why this is a safe danger activity because it feels light and simple. I mean, I was making jokes about being a terrible drawer, but what does it actually reveal for us?
Well, that's the key. I mean, there are lots of icebreakers and warm-ups that start with, either, tell us something about you that no one else knows, or two truths and a lie, and that sort of thing. Um, which tends to put most people into a panic. And, they have to come up with something interesting and they have to make it, what am I going to tell? And how am I going to be less interesting than everybody else? And what I've found is that finding a balance between telling something useful about yourself that people are going to remember, but doing it in a way that takes the edge off so that there is a bit of danger. You are making yourself vulnerable. You are sharing something personal, but it is still feels safe. So for this activity in particular, people think they're talking about this person or this drawing or this thing. So they've projected and they're talking about that. But what they're really sharing are their values and their priorities and their perspective on life, who they hope to be, how they hope to impact the world, where they're drawing that from. All of that comes spilling out in these stories. So people walk away with real insight into somebody's character, not just a fact, but really they get to know them pretty quickly. This a small piece of them. It's only an icebreaker, but it is something, at conferences, it's much more interesting than how is your flight and, something that's utterly meaningless. But this is
Yeah.
a nice way of really connecting with people about who they are.
And I love that it's like just that little bit of risk to your point. It's not like, and it's not, it's such a lovely way in. Because it's not like, "Be vulnerable," which we always think that we can force people into that. It's like, "Just tell me a story about somebody," and we all have a story to tell. So it's just that tiny little widening of the aperture into another human who's on your team, and I really love that it feels low risk in some ways, but actually just is very high impact from that.
Yeah. That's the goal.
I think it's excellent. I kind of wanna do this all the time. I wanna make more. I wanna draw more pictures of people who've influenced me. It feels like such an homage to them. Um, so we talked about the discomfort of planning, team building. Almost every leader I bet on this call, is familiar with it. I'm laughing a little to myself because I am thinking of a moment when I first started at IDEO where I thought I had to actually plan our home meet, and I'd only been at the company for a day. Um, but you wanna do something that feels fun, but you don't want it to be frivolous. You wanna do something that feels relevant and salient, but not, like, boring and arduous. And you have actually said that most team building fails because it optimizes for the wrong things. Like, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I want everybody to know, those leaders that are in this boat, um, I feel you. I have always loathed team building myself. I am an introvert's introvert and would rather gnaw off a limb and run for the hills than ever do another role-playing skit in my life. Um, and, obviously you're not alone. I think a great number of our clients that find us at Make Believe Works do so by searching team building that doesn't suck. And
It's lovely that that's the search term you own. I think that's awesome.
it's it's telling though about what people expect from team building. Um,
Mhm.
and like I said, what I've seen, the reason most team building fails is because it optimizes either for fun or for instruction.
Right.
And neither of those actually build the team. They don't build trust or connection. They don't deepen understanding. And it's those things that carry over outside of just the activity that make the difference. Fun matters, absolutely, but it's not enough on its own. If nothing new gets revealed about who we are, then we didn't build a team, we just filled a time slot. So there are three traps that I see all the time with team building activities that I would say have rubbed me the wrong way, and they seem to rub other people the wrong way, so I avoid them. That is not to say they are not for everybody. There aren't people out there that love these things, and I don't want to offend anybody. But here's the three that I've found I try to avoid. The first is competition. So competition is a quick and easy way to get people fired up, to get their pulse up, and that's lovely. And, scavenger hunts and game shows are fun. But because competition inherently divides people and pits them against each other, it encourages people to show off, and then most people lose. It's not a great mindset to be in if the goal is to have people lower their guard and show up as their authentic selves. It sort of pushes them in the opposite direction. So that's the first, competition. The second is passivity. So again, there are plenty of fun activities like cooking classes or paint and sips that are designed so that people just do what they're told, but they don't actively contribute any part of themselves to the experience. And I found that's an issue because you never want someone to walk away thinking, if I'd skipped that, no one would have noticed. It was a waste. You always want people to feel like their presence was valued and valuable and that it was worth their time. And then the third thing is sort of what I think of as old news activities. So again, fun
Mhm.
stuff like happy hours or escape rooms, but basically where you carry the old dynamics into a new room. So the loud people get loud, the quiet people get quiet, the friends huddle together, and everybody goes home and shows up at work the same as the next day. Um, you want people to walk away with new insights, with new connections, with new things. And so yeah, fun, absolutely critical, but it has to have depth. The goal is really behavior change, ultimately. And done right, team building isn't just fluff. It's essentially infrastructure. It's the framework. It's where teams actually get to practice the trust and the curiosity and the connection that's going to drive the results you're after.
I wanna, ask you a little bit about the workshop framework. Like, is that the only place that this kind of work can happen? So, um, what if a team doesn't have the ability to bring everybody together in the same room? We have some questions popping up actually in the chat about, how does this work for hybrid or remote?
Mhm.
Um, so wanted to talk a little bit about format and construct.
Yeah. So workshops aren't the only place. They are a great starting point because they're concentrated practice spaces,
Right.
like a design sprint, and they're a good focused effort in a short amount of time. And we run workshops in person, we run them virtually, we run them hybrid. So I know a lot of people, especially since COVID, have blamed remote working for splitting up our culture. And for my take on it is that the culture was broken in the first place. It wasn't that
Mm-hmm.
great. We've lost water cooler culture. Great. What did we talk about at the water cooler? The weather and the TV shows we were watching. That's not really getting to know somebody on a deep and meaningful level. So I do think that, the real point is that building that sort of psychological safety isn't a memo that you can hand out. It's a muscle that has to be practiced and built. And that can be practiced in a focused workshop like that, or it can be woven into day-to-day experiences of the workplace, whether it's a remote workplace or an in-person place. Um, Leaders can build that muscle with their teams for that teams without a big formal event. I think a big piece of it is in how questions are asked and responded to when they are delivered. Who gets airtime, whether people are invited and encouraged and rewarded for taking small risks, regardless of the outcome, and how those outcomes are treated after they take those risks. The risks that you encourage they don't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to
Right.
be a big, you know, goal setting project. It can be small. It can be, something as simple as admitting that, as a leader, that you don't know something, or treating disappointments as useful, as learning and as sharing opportunities. Or, one of the things that I really loved when I worked at IDEO was it was a comfortable place to share half-formed ideas before they were really
Yeah.
polished. I didn't have to worry about being judged by people. I knew they would either tell me it was a bad idea or take it and make it better. And that dynamic just made it so much easier to take risks because I knew while there was something at stake, it wasn't my integrity. It wasn't my image in their eyes. And that made a huge, huge difference.
I really like that idea of like baking those safe danger moments into everyday work, whether it's a status meeting or a small experiment that you're doing as a team. I think that then it actually becomes a little bit like part of the culture. And I just want to very briefly sort of share a little bit of a takeaway I had as you were speaking. Um, a, it seems like a good diagnostic for us as leaders could be like, what does a question that we can ask ourselves is sort of this notion of like, what does this activity or meeting actually ask people to risk or reveal? And frankly, if it's the right level of risk or reveal for the moment in time, right? So I made my joke about like, be vulnerable, tell me about your deepest, darkest secret. Uh, no, first of all, but what small activity or question or engagement can I create in those moments that just open up a little bit of opportunity for us to know more about each other and engage more and trust each other just that little bit more. To your point, um the half-baked idea that everybody riffs on and nobody gets angry that it's not a perfect idea.
Yeah. I love that insight. I think it's great. And I wonder if there is a point of a meeting if you're not asking people to take some sort of risk. Even if it's just asking me the question that I don't know to ask, if I'm giving you a status update, if you're not asking them to take a risk, maybe there's no point to the meeting.
Oh, yeah, because it could have been a memo, right? It could have just been something
Yeah.
that you
If
wrote.
you're not inviting something from them that's a little bit out of what you expect.
Right. And also sort of shaping that idea that it's okay to not know every single answer because we can't. Like, sometimes you will just have to go away and find the answer, and there's no shame in that, I think is something important. You talked about psychological safety just now, and this does come up a lot in leadership conversations. I feel like it's often misunderstood or sort of treated like this very vague concept with a lot of definitions. And you make a clear distinction between psychological safety and comfort. And I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes that businesses and, even friends and families make is confusing safety with comfort. Comfort is about making it easy for everyone to fit in, but safety is when people can stand out and still belong. So real safety isn't about removing the friction. It's about creating enough trust that people can use that friction in a healthy way. They can risk being themselves and show up in ways that might rub against other people's perspectives, but that creates a sort of a healthy glow that lights a path forward. Um, Creativity, innovation, inspiration, they all require a degree of friction. You
Right.
smooth that out, it's pablum. There's nothing, no value to it. They thrive on that. So, with safety, then the friction ignites discovery. So my take on it is that psychological safety doesn't mean removing disagreement. Um, it's it's about creating the circumstances and the culture where that disagreement is welcomed and
Yeah.
useful and productive. Um, Comfort doesn't create trust, but sharing emotional risk does. And I think that's an important balance to find. A lot of people think of safety and danger as opposites. But ideally, for me, I think I like to think of them more like dance partners. That the
Mm.
safety gives us solid footing and is important, but that danger gives us movement and momentum. So, too much safety becomes comfort and we stagnate, too much danger and we shut down. So, safe danger, as you were asking earlier, is sort of the zone that I try to design for, the emotional sweet spot between those two, where people have a culture where they feel secure enough to leave security behind, but
Mhm.
stretched enough to grow.
I love that. Because I have been in situations where people interpret psychological safety as I'm never going to be criticized, or I never have to take constructive criticism about my work. Especially if you work in creative endeavors, like many of us have been to design school, the crit is actually part of making the work better. And
Yeah.
so that idea of, and you touched on it earlier, it is not about um, criticism of me. It's about like shaping the work, and the zone of safety is much more about this idea of um creating space for us to be willing to take the risk, because we know it doesn't diminish us as humans to have to take any kind of criticism or take that risk,
Yeah.
right? That feels so much more, whereas comfort feels like, let me wrap a comfy blanket around me and not have to sort of engage with the risk at all.
Yeah. And I think that's key. You have to there's a shift from ego to integrity, I think, is part of what I think about it, is like the critique is not of me as a person. It's about I want the work to be as good as possible. So I bring in people that are going to help that happen. And I acknowledge that I don't have all the answers. And when you take your ego piece out of it and you're allowed to take some risks and make mistakes and learn from them, it just creates an entirely different dynamic and potential for growth.
Yeah, I think that's really key. When we hear about psychological safety and vulnerability and creating safe spaces at work, like talk about it all the time. A lot of teams and individuals, I think, still don't feel safe taking real risks or speaking honestly. I've been that person. I've been in a room and thought, like, is this really the place where I'm going to say what I think?
Yeah.
Um, from what you have seen, how do leaders often unintentionally create what looks like safety on the surface, but doesn't actually make it feel safer to take those risks?
Yeah. I think you hit it on the head. The words "this is a safe space" have never made any place safer than it was before those were spoken. Like,
Right,
you don't declare it, you demonstrate it.
right.
And the simplest way I like to think about it is that, true safety gets revealed by what happens after someone takes a risk. Leaders can say it's safe to speak up, but if the first time someone raises a concern, they get dismissed or punished or labeled as difficult, the room learns that and they learn it fast.
Mhm.
So a leader can say the right things and put up the posters and hand out the bullet points, but if nothing in the day to day actually reflects that experience, that truth, then nothing's going to change in the culture because people will protect themselves. Um, there was a VP that I worked with for a while that started this ritual. And at the beginning of her Monday status meetings, she would share one thing that she'd gotten wrong the previous week. And it could be anything. It would be, it could be a misstep in a meeting or, a missed train stop that she went too far, something like it didn't really matter. And at first, people weren't quite sure why this was part of the meeting. But over time, she told me that that consistency really shifted the climate of her team. The team members began naming their own missteps as time went on, and it opened the door for faster learning and sharper debate. And within a quarter, from her point of view, the team was experimenting more boldly, solving more problems with, more creativity because they just knew that they weren't expected to be perfect. Um,
Mm,
so, and that, you know, invocation to be vulnerable sometimes can turn into sort of a weird oversharing without context. And that also doesn't build trust. It just makes people uncomfortable and a little weirded out. Being vulnerable does not mean turning the elevator ride into a therapy session. Um, Vulnerability isn't a confession. It's just exposure with intention. It's showing a
I
piece of
love that.
yourself that that helps others show a piece of themselves. And so when leaders do that, they create permission, not chaos. Um, but the leaders need to model the behaviors they want from their teams and give their teams plenty of chances to practice that behavior.
I love that. That idea that vulnerability is exposure with intention, I think is such a um, really thoughtful way of putting that because it isn't just sort of performative vulnerability. It's really kind of intentional and purposeful.
Yeah.
You said something earlier that I wanted to touch on, which is this notion of risk taking being something that you need to practice. Uh, why why is that the case? Like, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Risk taking to me is a muscle. It has to be flexed, it has to be stretched, and it has to be challenged. Um, and the practice is so important because if a team's first encounter with real risk is a high stakes project or something like that, it's a little bit like trying to run a marathon before you've gone jogging. People in those situations, they tend to default to fear as a decision maker. They tend to protect themselves, take the most assured success route, and they get quiet even when they may know better. So the practice allows teams to, they need safe spaces to feel what risk feels like before the stakes are high. The feeling is important. It's not just knowledge. It's not just ideas. It's feeling it in your body, knowing what it's like when cortisol starts
Yeah.
streaming through everything. And so that's why I think of team building when it's done right as a practice and not a perk. It's a chance to rehearse trust when the stakes are so low so that it shows up when the stakes are high. Um, and again, it can be simple stuff. It can be, just careful storytelling prompts like the one we started with that build connection in a non-threatening way. Or it can be something like, the IDEO style pre-flights that surface assumptions and norms and things before a project starts. Um, I personally, when I was there, I started a version of that sort of pre-flight thing that went a little bit beyond words. And this was a self-selecting group, so I'm aware of that. But one of the favorite things that I did was, um, before a project would start, we'd bring the members of the team together and the prompt that I would give them was to reflect on how it feels for them to go from being blocked to being inspired. Inside, internally, what is the journey from being frustrated to relieved? What does it feel like? What does it look like to them? And then what I'd do is I'd ask them to tell that journey, that arc, with their body as a dance,
As a
which
dance.
which is
Okay.
horrifying to most people and would be to me, but it was also designed to take a lot of edge off, so they didn't have to perform it for everybody. Instead, they taught it to everybody, so the power dynamic shifted and stuff. But the point of all that was that it allowed for people to understand each other's internal worlds in a totally unexpected way. I can say the word, well, I can say I get stressed, but I can also say like the word car. And when I say the word car, half the people out there picture a blue thing, some of them picture a red thing. It's too vague.
Hmm.
But if you act it out and you see it, now I get it. Now I understand that, Jeremy is going to stand in place and stomp when he's frustrated, whereas Juan is going to spin and Ashley's going to take a nap. And okay, now I get what we're going to face together when times get tough. So, it's playful and silly and certainly uncomfortable for a huge amount of people out there, which I acknowledge, but it's also a real opportunity to practice navigating discomfort together and prepare for what's coming.
Yeah, I really love that idea of learning how to navigate discomfort together. I used to teach this project management for account people course when I worked in advertising. And and as you're talking, I keep thinking about how um, you know, people are a lot one of the phrases I used to use was people are a lot less likely to drill a hole in the boat if they feel like they're in it with you. But you can't wait till the 11th hour for them to feel like they're in it with you. You're building that trust and that camaraderie and that changing that behavior of the team all the way along. So that when we are at the 11th hour and we're in this boat, like we're all figuring out how to row together, like you can depend on that. But you only get there if you're doing that work along the way. I think it's such because we've learned how to navigate
Yeah.
together. I didn't mean to have a boat analogy with navigate, but I'm glad that worked out. Um,
Beautifully done.
um, I it occurs to me that one of the things that maybe we take away from some of the discussion we've just been having is also this idea of asking ourselves, are we optimizing for comfort or are we optimizing for growth and learning? And helping the teams to sort of find their way through that. So just a question that we should always be asking ourselves as we try to think about how we want to grow our teams potentially.
I love that.
One question that I wanted to ask about was sort of this idea of um, as organizations, we tend to try and solve our problems with tools and frameworks. And so we'll invest in a lot of them tools, frameworks, programs. Um, and yet we will then notice that we are still struggling to change how our teams actually work. I've I know that you've seen this firsthand. I bet you get called in at these moments a lot. And I'm wondering if you have a perspective on why these efforts stall.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've been called in to these sort of moments on various stages. When I was at IDEO, I was helping plan them or implement them, and now in my work, I'm called in to figure out how do we make them give them life again. Um, but what I've seen is that I think the simplest way I can put it is that a recipe doesn't make you a chef. So, people don't transform just because they're handed instructions or a new framework or a new innovation hub. Um, they transform because they get practice, they get feedback, and that the systems are there to support that change. So the tools that I've seen fail when the trust isn't there to support them. When, if people are afraid of looking foolish, then no amount of frameworks or innovation things are going to bring out really surprising ideas. If they don't believe that dissent is welcome, if they've learned that the organization punishes mistakes, then again, people are just going to go through the standard motions that they know are safe and are going to get them their bonuses, and nothing different takes root. Um, Oftentimes, that's another piece of it. There's a structural mismatch, like innovation timelines don't match up with reward systems.
Mm.
Promotions and incentives, they are all, for many companies, are designed to reward short-term delivery and successes, not long-term learning or deep change. So if you're asking teams to take risk, but not giving them the time or the support or the protection to do that, um, then change doesn't happen. Change doesn't happen when there's a sword dangling overhead. It just doesn't. So that's why I've seen these things stall. It's not because the frameworks are useless or because an innovation hub didn't have the best of intentions. It's because the organization, the human infrastructure underneath it wasn't set up to support those efforts.
That change doesn't happen when there's a sword dangling overhead. I feel like I could wear that on a t-shirt. Um, can you share an example of what good versus bad risk taking looks like from a leadership perspective?
Yeah. So, I mean, good risk, I think, is about when you give people clear ownership with
Mm.
real autonomy.
Mhm.
I think it's important that leaders stay engaged so that they can be supportive, so that if something doesn't go right, the individuals or the teams aren't left hanging. So if something fails, the failure is shared and examined. And so everybody grows from the effort. There's a sense we're all in it together, but you're leading the way, and I trust you and I believe you. Um, Bad risk, I think, is responsibility without authority.
Yeah.
It's when someone's asked to take a big swing, but leadership is like, if this goes wrong, this is on your head. It's Mission Impossible rules. We'll disavow you.
Right.
And so the individuals get burned, and
Right.
it teaches everybody to stop taking risks. Um, I would say I think one of the best examples I was ever immersed in was my first week at IDEO. Um, and I should preface that to say that prior to coming to IDEO, I'd spent a good amount of my career working in financial marketing for Morgan Stanley. So it was a very different atmosphere. It
Oh,
was
wow, yeah.
very much sort of Kansas into Oz, emotionally speaking. And it took some adjustment. But um, on my I think, first week on this project team, I was asked to, I'm a writer by trade. So I was asked to create a deck for a major presentation to a big client. And I was like, okay. And I did what I'd been trained to do, which is I asked for the brand guidelines, some past examples of other decks of what is the brand voice that you would like me to use? And my team lead sort of looked at me and just said, your voice is IDEO's voice. That's why we hired you. If you have questions, let's chat and let's talk about it. But what I realized with sort of equal measures, joy and horror, was that they didn't want me to fit in. They wanted me to help them stand out again, and they trusted me to do it. And that feels like good risk to me. It made me really invested in the work. It made me put some of myself into it and feel like, oh, I'm adding, I'm contributing, I have a purpose here. I'm not just a cog in the machine taking over for somebody else. Um, and it's that sort of safety. When you have that safety net, it allows you to risk the missteps that will lead to growth.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about, like, a takeaway that I'm getting from this is we often ask teams to innovate together, but the reality is that for teams to be able to succeed together, they also kind of need to know how to fail together. And we need to prepare them for that as well, because there will always be those moments, but the failures aren't bad. What can we learn from them to carry forward with us as a team?
I think that is so right on. One of my an example of that, completely personal example is of safe danger in general of taking that risk is something I did with my kid. When my daughter was like 5, she really wanted to go on the big rings at the playground, but
Mhm.
she was terrified. The big kids went on those. It was a big drop. But you could see she was hungry for it. So one day I took her to the middle of the rings. I lifted her up. Had her hold on, and then I had her do the scary thing on purpose. I said, "Okay, let go." And there was a little bit of convincing, but finally she let go, she dropped, she crumpled, and she got back up. And I said, okay, that's as bad as it gets. That's the worst it is. So if that's too much, don't do the rings. But if you're comfortable with it, knock yourself out. And I hadn't finished that sentence before she was back on there doing the rings and the rings and the rings and the rings because she knew two key things. She knew what failure felt like, and she knew that she could survive it.
I love that, actually, and I think that, it's also a good lesson that sometimes the thing that we imagine being the worst thing isn't that bad after all. I wanna ask you one more question before we turn to some audience questions, and it really goes back to the comment you made about I'm an introvert's introvert, and because I am also an introvert, and I actually don't like facilitating meetings or things like that, and I would bet that a lot of our listeners also feel that way. They don't choose to do team experiences, they have to facilitate them. And so can you describe what good facilitation actually requires, and if introverts can do it.
Yes, it is very lucky that I so love what I do, because it is absolutely antithetical to my wiring. The amount of cortisol that I have to deal with is
I
just
know, I get sweaty just thinking about it,
it's
actually.
so frustrating. But I have, I had the good fortune to be surrounded by great presenters, which also coming up, but it was also really devastating to me because I figure, oh, I can't be Alex, so I'm not going to bother doing that. But over time, I have learned that good facilitation doesn't have to be about being the center of attention. Um, you don't have to perform. What it's really about is creating a space for other people to show up and to feel safe doing that. So, you just, like I said, you don't have to perform, but you do have to be intentional about it. So, one of the practical shifts that I picked up going along was how much curiosity can beat compliments in
Mm,
facilitating and drawing people out. Compliments sound nice. I did in our workshops, people are always making things, and my first instinct is to say, "That's marvelous. Oh, I love that. That's so great." But compliments can also shut down the conversation. The
mm.
minute you say, "That's amazing," they think that's enough. "Oh, thank you." They shut down. And you've also started everybody else's gears spinning in their heads, wondering if theirs is as good or thinking theirs is better. Why didn't I get a compliment? All of that starts going, which is not so great. But if you ask a question, if you get curious instead, it opens the room. So instead of saying, "Oh, that is stunning and beautiful and brilliant," I'll say, "I noticed you used all blue. What made you choose that?" And that kind of curiosity says, this is valuable, and I want to understand how your mind works. And then people will start to tell you things that are useful to everybody else around them because they understand how this person's thought process goes. Um, and if you're asking people to be vulnerable, the other thing I've learned is that you've got to model it yourself
Right.
first, not as performance and not as confession. And that's the trick. You've got to find that balance, but as a way of being honest and authentic to set some parameters that let people know it's okay. This is how deep things go. This is the deep end. You don't have to come with me. There's a shallow end, there's a middle end, but I've set the parameters. I have gone as far as we're going to go, and you can choose somewhere else to go. So it's about giving them some safety by taking that risk yourself.
I like that shift, and I think we can all try it. This idea of replacing praise with questions to see if the room opens up. And for introverts, it actually allows you to truly facilitate as opposed to have to generate the whole conversation yourself as well. So you're really not the center of attention, but in fact, allowing other people in to help co create the experience in some ways. I love that idea.
Yeah. And it means
Um,
more to them.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I'm actually terrible at allowing enough time for Q&A from the audience, but today I made a purposeful choice to do it. So we are now going to take a few questions from the audience. It's our guests are like yourself are so interesting, but we have so many questions and I want to make sure we get to some of them. Uh, so I'm the team here has gathered a bunch of them. We will take a few of them, but just know that we're also actually going to record a second session with Ben that answers more of your questions. So definitely stay tuned for that one. So I'm going to read the first question, and I apologize if I read anybody's name incorrectly. Nuruddin asks, what should we do as a leader where the organization is less or not psychologically safe, but the leader of the team is putting their best effort into psychological safety? And Tamara had sort of a build on that, which is, balancing external not safe spaces while creating safe spaces for your team. And I think we've all been there, right? Where
Yeah.
we're trying to cocoon our team in some way from the larger picture.
Yeah. And, this is often what some of the best leaders face because they're in a certain ecosystem and they say, no, this is not the best way to do things. And they try to push against it. But the ecosystem is the ecosystem. So what I've seen is that to some degree, acknowledging that is
Mhm.
very helpful for the team to say, you don't want to go, and you can't obviously say, I disagree with the leadership and blah, 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 blah. But you can say, we do things a little bit differently here. Our emphasis in this team, in this dynamic is whatever it may be. It's our priorities, our values. And as I said earlier, I think it's really about the behavior and how you model it for the people that you work with that has the biggest impact. The organization as a whole might not have the systemic support that you would need to make wholesale change. But if you do some things like, you schedule like a weekly ritual that rewards inquiry rather than certainty. Like,
Right.
10 minutes of questions we're not asking ourselves. Or, if you take that cue about curiosity over comparison, and instead of replacing people's reports with "That's great," with leading something like "Why did you choose that?" and asking for more things. Um, I think that's the sort of behavior, the everyday behavior that makes the shift, that allows your team to really be the team you hope they can be, even if you don't have the external support. And when you show up that well, and when you can prove that this is having benefits, that's when people start to listen. You give them some stats, you give them some performance, you start showing them that you don't have the turnover that the other departments have, that people are loyal, that they
Right.
really want to stay, that you're retaining top talent because they're invested in the work you're doing. And you go to your higher ups and you say, this is what we're doing and this is the results, then they listen.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, yeah, sorry, I'm actually thinking about an experience I had a long time ago, but we're gonna go to another question. For culture builders and stewards, like those of us in HR and the executive team, risk-taking is a double-edged sword. Employees look up to us to do the right thing and do it right, which puts immense pressure on us. As a result, executives and HR leaders do things and deliver activities that sometimes can feel not meaningful. What would your advice be in this situation?
So am I understanding correctly that because they're taking more risks, that sometimes they don't deliver the sort of meaning that they're hoping the activities will deliver?
Yeah, I think this one's interesting. It's they're people in HR and at the executive level, and risk taking feels like a double edged sword. I
Okay.
think it's this idea of like feeling the pressure of being in leadership,
Mhm.
and wanting to do the right thing, but not sort of feeling well, not wanting it to feel like a platitude, but sometimes things coming across that way.
Mhm.
That's the impression I'm getting from this question.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I
mean,
think
I have thoughts on this, but
please share your thoughts.
I mean, don't make them platitudes. Like, as leaders at a company, you do have some say in how you react to things and what you make real in a company and what you don't. And I think people can tell when it's not real or when it is sort of performative, to use a phrase we talked about earlier. As somebody who's been in leadership, that's just how I feel. Like I just feel like showing up like my real self and trying to operate truthfully almost every day. Like I don't know how else to do that.
I thought the question was gonna go with the double-edged sword. The pushback I often get from leaders about this is that that's lovely to take risks and to show that I'm not perfect, but people are looking up to me, and they need to
Mhm.
know that I
Yeah,
know what
that's a
I'm
fair
doing.
point too. Yeah.
And if I start saying I don't know what I'm doing, that's not great.
Yeah.
And my response to that is, and it's about finding that middle path
Mm.
of showing people that you have a vision, that you have the skills and confidence to get there, but you don't have the roadmap entirely mapped out quite yet, but you're gonna get
Yeah.
them there. Um, it's also, I mean, I think it's a useful parenting dynamic as well.
Mm.
It's where, yes, you have the experience, your kids should know that they can trust you, but at the same time, I personally think it's important that they also recognize that you're growing as well as a human being, and because that allows them, when they step into that role, to realize they don't have to be perfect.
I'm gonna ask one more audience question, and then we're gonna go on to our lightning round. So brace yourself. How Julie asks us, how can a leader reverse a culture when he or she critiqued some team members in front of everyone so that they can again build trust and psychological safety? Is that fixable?
Well, I would say the first step to fixing that might simply be acknowledging the change
Mhm.
and saying, in the past, I've approached it this way because I really felt that was the best way to do it. I felt that, having these critiques in public and got these outcomes, and that's why I made that choice. But on reflection, as I've been thinking about it, I've decided that that's not how we're going to go forward because it has these consequences and laying it out. But then the real work is living up to that from then on out, is offering the critiques in a different fashion and living up to that and showing the behavior that you want to be present. But I do think acknowledging a shift is necessary for people not to be confused and to always hold that past one in their heads of like, is this the time the hammer is going to come down? Like, you
Right.
got to
Yeah,
say, you got to acknowledge the hammer came down and you got to say, I'm putting it away and we're going to do things differently.
yeah. I also think leaders underestimate how much owning a mistake that you've made matters to people, and
Yeah.
then, making that shift on the other side of it. I think that's really fair. Okay, lightning round. We have 7 questions, and you don't need to, overthink them. Just kind of give us your first kind of reaction to each one of them.
Okay. I'm ready.
All right, excellent. What book, TV show, or movie would you recommend to our listeners?
I'm going with my first thought, which is The Midnight Gospel.
Hmm.
It's a cartoon. It's an animated show. It is absolutely absurd. It's by the same guy, Pendleton Ward, that did Adventure Time. But as weird as it ends up being one of the most honest, raw explorations of death and grief and joy and purpose and creativity that I've seen. They're serious conversations. That's the audio, but it's wrapped in visual chaos. They're telling two different stories at the same time, which creates a sort of marvelous cognitive dissonance that allows both of them to impact you in a way that you wouldn't expect. And it turns out to be a pretty accurate reflection, I think, of what being human feels like.
It's amazing. Okay. Who is a creative thinker you look up to?
Mr. Rogers. He is he's the king of simple, honest, emotional experiences. Every choice that man made for his show lowered threats so that kids could hear something true without flinching and face the world as it was without being afraid of it. And I just admire that endlessly because I know how complicated it is to remove things, to take things away, and to show up with something simple that people dismiss without realizing how much work goes into that simplicity.
Love it. What is a skill you're currently working on?
Daydreaming, um,
Mm.
letting my mind wander long enough for those unexpected connections to form. But the moment I do that, it's really hard for my practical mind not to snap to attention when something interesting comes up. It says, "Okay, what are we going to do with that?" So trying to just keep daydreaming. That's what I'm working on.
What's a skill you're proud of?
I'm good at earning the trust of animals. Uh,
Nice.
I think, you've got to listen to them and learn their language and speak it with them. You can't rush it and you can't fake it. And I think I'm pretty good at that. So that's something I'm proud of.
What's a mistake you learned from?
Um, I spent years thinking that safety meant control, that I was safe if I was the person who had it all figured out ahead of time. Um, and what I learned over time is that while control can feel like solid protection, if you live there too long, it becomes a cage. The armor that protects us from risks also keeps us from growing from those same risks.
What's a philosophy you live by?
Um, there's a beautiful quote by the poet Rumi. The wound is where the light gets in,
Mm.
that I come back to again and again and again. It really resonates because it's not so much about denying the dents and dings that life gives us, but it is about finding the gift in them, and the value in appreciating your scars for what they offer.
And one question that we ask every guest on Creative Confidence: what advice would you give to your younger self?
Um, Other than eat more vegetables,
I just gave my kids that advice the other day.
if you hide it's a lesson I wish I'd learned. If you hide who you are, then the world will be poorer for it. Um, I learned that when I had kids myself, I imagined them diminishing their own uniqueness just to fit in, and it was heartbreaking. And if you don't use your own voice, then the world is missing out, But even worse, the people that mean the most to you, the people you look up to, and all that, they're missing out. Um, I think many of us end up living someone else's life
Mm.
by following expectations we inherited instead of choices we made ourselves. And, I certainly learned early on to hide and diminish the qualities that made me unique because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be loved, in family and dynamics and stuff. And I wish I had learned earlier to focus on being me instead of who I thought others expected me to be.
Well, I know that we are glad that you learned to do that because this has been an amazing episode. Just a few through lines from today's conversations with Ben. Team building isn't just about fun, although fun is good, it's about behavior change. Psychological safety is not comfort, it is the freedom from retribution to take risks. Safe danger is something that teams can practice. It is not something that leaders declare. Tools and frameworks will fail when trust in the culture isn't there to support them. And good facilitation is about making space, not performing, and introverts can do it too. I would like to invite all of you to subscribe to the Creative Confidence podcast if you enjoyed today's episode, and also to our newsletter at IDOU, where we'll announce all of our guests and also send out follow ups to today's episode. Definitely check out the IDOU course, Cultivating Creative Collaboration, where we talk about things like healthy friction and how to work with your team through even moments of uncertainty. And you'll learn those lessons from our own CEO, Mike Pang. And you can learn more about this course and all of our other courses at idou.com. And after today's episode, definitely head over to LinkedIn to share your favorite takeaways and builds from today's conversation and connect with each other and watch for a recap of this conversation. And of course, the follow up episode I mentioned that Ben will do to answer more of your questions. Thank you, Ben, for joining us today. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real joy.
Thank you. And to all of our audience members today, thank you all for joining us and spending your time with us. That's always such a gift that we appreciate. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Creative Confidence.